Here to talk about some of the latest happenings at the state capitol is State Senator Scott Wiener. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We know the governor just gave his State of the State address talking about his budget priorities. What was your take on that?
The governor gave a very concise and strong speech, really focusing on California's strengths, our successes, acknowledging that we have significant challenges, but really just reminding us of how strong this state is. So I was really happy to hear the governor's remarks.
One of your latest bills is meant to protect the DNA of people who are victims of sexual assault, because that DNA apparently was being used to potentially prosecute them in unrelated crimes. I think a lot of people were shocked to find out that this was even happening.
Yeah. Yes, we need to put an end to that practice. I was happy to hear that Chief Scott immediately came out and said this is unacceptable and that we need to stop doing it. And so I think we're going to have broad support for this effort. I mean, I think a lot of us didn't realize that it was technically legal under state law to use someone's rape kit DNA to prosecute that victim in a future prosecution. And that is horrifying. Being sexually assaulted is one of the most traumatizing things that can happen to a human being. And then if you imagine the courage that it takes for someone who's just been sexually assaulted to immediately go to the hospital and submit to a physical exam and swabbing, that can be, for some people, re-traumatizing. And it's very brave for people to do that. There are so many barriers for sexual assault survivors to come forward. And if we start signaling to people, well, if you give that rape kit swab, that might be used against you in the future, it's just one more reason for survivors to not come forward. We need to be very clear to sexual assault survivors that we support you.
So I can't imagine you're going to have any resistance with this bill. Are you seeing anything?
So far, we've not heard of any opposition, but we just introduced it, so we'll see what happens. There are bills that I've seen that seem entirely uncontroversial or non-controversial, and then all of a sudden people come forward. So we'll see.
Okay. Yeah, you never do know in Sacramento. You recently weighed in on the situation that's been going on at UC Berkeley, where they're having to deny students new enrollments because of this lawsuit by some of the neighborhood groups that are concerned about the lack of housing. And I know lack of housing is something that you've been trying to work on for some time. But in this case, you're trying to defend the university and the students?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tragic what is happening at UC Berkeley, and the legislature needs to step in and fix it. The idea that you have basically neighborhood NIMBYs that are using an environmental law to force UC Berkeley to deny admission to 3,000 students. It makes no sense. We need more seats for students at UC and CSU and community colleges. We need to make it easier for our young people to get public higher education and to have that path to the middle class. It's so important. And so we need to fix our laws to make sure that doesn't happen again. In addition, we do need a lot more student and faculty housing on campus. There's not nearly enough. We have high rates of college student homelessness in our state, and a lot of faculty members who are not paid very much really struggle with housing. So that's why I introduced legislation, Senate Bill 886, to expedite the approval of student and faculty on-campus housing at UC, CSU, and community colleges.
You also recently introduced a bill that would make the process of getting a liquor license a little bit easier. Tell us about the impetus behind that.
Yeah, so our hospitality sector, we've come to, during the pandemic, I think people have come to appreciate more the fragility of this sector, of our restaurants and bars. and how important they are for our community. If you imagine any neighborhood where you have a bunch of restaurants and bars that close down, and you have all those vacancies, and you have less nightlife, fewer places to eat, it's very damaging. And so, our liquor laws were passed, many of them in the 1920s, 1930s, and a lot of them have stood the test of time, and they're fine. But there are some that are outdated. And one area in particular, state alcohol laws give ABC the authority to basically override local city decisions on whether to issue a liquor license and whether how to notify neighbors. So the bill does a few things, but the main one is giving cities more local control over how to engage the public, and not having ABC come in from Sacramento and micromanage what a city has to do in terms of working with neighbors.
Okay, and where does that stand? Do you think that's going to pass?
We introduced the bill, I think, last month, and it'll presumably receive a committee hearing in probably April. I think we have a shot at passing it. We included a number of items in the bill. I can't guarantee they're all going to pass, but hopefully at least some of them will.
Now, you were the big advocate, I think it was last year, for keeping bars and restaurants open a little bit later into the morning. Where did that end up?
Yes, for 20 years, first my predecessor, Senator Mark Leno, and now in recent years myself, we've advocated to give cities local decision making. So cities can decide, do we want to stick with 2 a.m. closing time, or do we want to allow, in downtown or entertainment zones, later service until 4 a.m. Nightlife is so important in California, and cities should be able to decide locally when their closing time is. Right now we have a one-size-fits-all 2 a.m. shutdown rule, whether you're in downtown LA or downtown San Francisco or in rural, Kern County. It's all the same. So that bill, after 15 years of trying, I had legislation that we actually passed through the legislature and got it to the governor, and Governor Brown vetoed it. I love Governor Brown, but he was just wrong, and it was tragic. Then we tried it again the next year, and it just didn't work. So we haven't ruled out reintroducing it, but we haven't decided yet.
Okay. Yeah, I lost track of that bill. I guess I'm getting old. Not staying out till 3 a.m. anymore.
Me too.
Anything else you want to talk about, or let our viewers know what's going on in Sacramento?
Yeah, what I do just want to really point out what's happening around the country, in Texas and Florida and other states, Republican, right-wing Republicans. I don't want to say there are a lot. I think most Republicans don't support these efforts, but Republican politicians who are using LGBTQ kids and most specifically transgender kids as political pawns to score political points. So we have Ron DeSantis in Florida pushing a bill to prohibit teachers from talking about LGBTQ issues or people.
The Don't Say Gay bill.
Yeah, the Don't Say.
Called.
We have the governor of Texas directing Child Protective Services to remove trans kids who receive health care from their parents' home, put them in foster care, and to criminally prosecute those parents for supporting healthcare access for their kids. We have a new bill in Idaho prohibiting all gender-affirming healthcare for trans kids and making it a crime for those kids to even leave the state to get that healthcare in another state. It's outrageous, and it's no wonder that we have high rates of suicide attempts among LGBTQ youth, because we have political leaders telling these kids that they have no value, that because of who they are, they might get taken away from their parents and their parents might go to jail. Can you imagine telling a teenager or a kid that because of who you are, you're going to get put in foster care and your parents are going to go to jail? It's horrific. And so we're looking at our options here in California to try to send a very clear message to trans kids and their families around the country that we see you, we love you, and we have your back.
And so what could this include? Like trying to divest in some of these states or some of the industries that are big in those states?
Stay tuned. Stay tuned. We already have travel bans using state money for these states that have anti-LGBTQ hate laws. But I think we need to go further in other areas, and we're working on that now.
Okay. We will stay tuned. Come and join us again and give us the lowdown when you're ready to reveal more.
Thank you.
Say, Senator Scott Wiener, thanks so much for joining us today on CBS News Bay Area.
Thank you for having me.